Video games. Who plays them? A bunch of nerds. That's who. That's who. Yeah, so this compilation video is gonna be from my TikTok page, and it's all cases, 12 of them to be exact, where gaming in some capacity was involved in the murder. Could be video games, could be board games, could be some sort of sports thing. But yeah, because sometimes people are cuckoo-cuckoo when they lose at Monopoly. Some people might Jenga your head clean off if you beat them at Mousetrap. Maybe. Do you remember that game? It took 45 years to set that damn game up, and then it was like over in 3 minutes, and the pieces never worked. Do I like video games, you ask? No, I'm not a dork. No, but I do have an Xbox and a PlayStation, and I'm currently replaying Assassin's Creed Valhalla. And when you save the game, it tells you how many hours you've been playing it. And I've been playing it for 73 hours, which is more than 3 days worth of time playing a video game. Fuck, I don't have a life. This is why I don't have a boyfriend. This is why I don't have anything. Because anyway, here are 12 cases that are gaming related in some capacity. So don't enjoy, please, and don't do anything you see here in this video at home, because you go to jail. So don't do it. Viewer discretion is advised. And this one's also rated M for mature. Hello, true crimerers. I'm starting a new series called Game Over, Man. This will be a series about deaths or incidences related to video games, board games, or sporting events. This particular case is connected to the video game Halo 3. This is Mark and Susan Petry. Mark Petry was a minister at the New Life Assembly of God in Wellington, Ohio. Now, their 16-year-old son, Daniel Petry, well, he liked video games. However, his parents did not really like the fact that he wanted to play violent video games. You see, 16-year-old Daniel went over to a friend's house one day, and the friend showed him the game Halo 3. Daniel loved it, and he wanted to get it himself. Now, when you think of violent video games, to me, Halo would not be at the top of that list, or even in the top 5 or 10. You know, I'm thinking games like Grand Theft Auto, you know, maybe Borderlands. Perhaps those games would be a little too much for, you know, the son of a minister. But that being said, every parent is different. And when Daniel went to his parents about wanting to buy Halo 3, they said no. Mark even told Daniel that if you brought that game into the house, or any violent video game into the house, they would be gotten rid of immediately. Now, the 16-year-old Daniel would sneak out of the house to purchase these violent video games without his parents knowing. Now, sometime around the release of Halo 3, Daniel got a staph infection, so he was housebound. But he managed to get a copy of Halo 3 without his parents knowing. It was reported that he played it for 18 hours a day, until his mother, Susan, caught him playing. She then went to Mark. Mark confiscated the game from Daniel, and he then locked it in a safe. And this was the same safe that Mark also locked a 9mm handgun in. On October 20th, 2007, Daniel stole the key from his father to open the safe. He took the game out, as well as the 9mm. Mark and Susan were sitting on a couch when Daniel walked up and said, "Hey, can you guys close your eyes for a second? I have a surprise for you." He then proceeded to shoot both of his parents in the back of the head. He also shot his mother in the arms and chest, and she died right there. Mark survived, and he recalls that suddenly his head went numb and he just saw blood pouring down. Daniel then put the gun in his father's hand to make it look like a murder-suicide. Daniel's siblings came to the house to watch a baseball game that night, and before his siblings got in the house, he managed to escape with the game, but he would be pulled over and arrested later. And he said, "My dad shot my mom." Ugh. Daniel was sentenced to 23 to life. Imagine killing someone, a loved one at that, just because you didn't want to play a game. Hello, true crimerers. It is time for another game over case, and it is the case of Tamara Lee Mason. Viewer discretion is advised. Tamara lived in Alberta, Minnesota, and she had 3 sons. 17-year-old Jacob Cobb, 18-year-old Andrew, and 25-year-old Dylan. On Christmas Day 2010, Tamara wanted to play a game with her boys. She wanted to play a nice, wholesome game of Yahtzee. Apparently, her 3 sons didn't want to play, and this, for some reason, created an argument. And then, according to the brothers, Tamara stormed out of the house, mad, and then she was never seen again. She was reported missing, and they had no idea where she could have gone. Well, 6 months later, they would find out. On July 7th, 2011, her body would be discovered on the exact property where she lived. Her cause of death was asphyxiation due to a neck compression, which fractured her larynx, and she had a bag over her head. So what happened? Well, like I said, that night she wanted to play a game of Yahtzee. They said, "We don't want to play." And then an argument broke out. But instead of storming out of the house like they claimed, she was killed right then and there. Her 17-year-old son, Jacob. He put a plastic bag over her head and then took a belt and tightened it around the bag and her neck, and suffocated her until she was dead. And then his 2 brothers helped dispose of the body. Dylan then put his mother's body in a trash can, loaded it into his vehicle, drove to a friend's house in South Dakota. He intended to burn the body, but that did not work. He then turned around, took her body back to Alberta, Minnesota, and left her body in the shed in the backyard. He had to wait a couple of months because the ground was frozen, so he needed the ground to be thawed for him to dig a hole to put his mother's body in. The police know all of this because an informant ratted them out. One of Dylan's friends told police that he confessed to hiding the body of his mother and said that his brother had killed her. But this all happened in July, and that's when they uncovered the body from the backyard. Jacob was sentenced to only 15 years. He was tried as a juvenile. For his role, Dylan was sentenced to 8 years, and Andrew was given 22.5 months, both for accessory after the fact. You killed your mother because you didn't want to play Yahtzee. Hello, true crimerers. It's time for another episode of Game Over! Phase 10. We've all played it, I'm sure. I'm sure we've all threatened a grandma or a grandparent or a great Aunt Bessie for throwing down a skip card, you stupid old b****. Okay. It's a fun game. Well, on October 23rd, 2008, some friends were playing a round of Phase 10. Now, I don't know which gentleman in this picture is the victim, because there are very few pictures I can find, but one of them was 68-year-old Marion Christopher Kachnick, and they lived in Brevard County, Florida. Oh, of course. Now, this puckered-lipped 72-year-old man is Richard Fortner. Hey, fucking knock off the attitude with that look. Listening to your jazz music and not paying attention in court. So he had friends over at his house in Cocoa Beach, and allegedly, Christopher Kachnick was helping his friend Donna Northcraft with her cards. Richard Fortner was like, "Oh, no, Sonny." He didn't like it. He thought it was cheating. This turned into an argument, which usually ends in something like this, someone flipping the fucking table over, and the rest of us laugh. But Richard didn't do that. Richard and Christopher got up like they were about to throw blows. A witness said, and I quote, "It looked like they were putting up their dukes," yes, they said that word, "and they were shadowboxing." I'm sorry. But none of them were actually punching each other. This is when Richard turned around and said, "I'll take care of this." He then went back to his bedroom, where he retrieved his .38 revolver. He told Christopher and his wife to leave, but as he was doing that, he was rushing towards Christopher with a gun in his hand. Then Christopher managed to grab Richard by the wrists, with apparently the gun pointing up towards the roof. And next thing you know, Richard then fired 2 shots into his friend Christopher. One of his friends then grabbed Richard and threw him into cabinets. Then Richard brought up his gun again and pointed it right in between the eyes of the friend who just did that. And then Richard told him, and I quote, "I'll kill you too, you son of a bitch," end quote. This friend, this witness, when they turned his back to walk away, he was terrified he was going to get a bullet in the back of his head, but he didn't. Well, he was found guilty of manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Now you may think, well, that's not a very long time, he murdered someone. Yes, he did. But 20 years for a 72-year-old man, that's basically the rest of his life. He ain't getting out of prison. Nor should he, prick. A man would murder claiming he was on an avenging mission for a character from a video game. Hello, true crimerers. This is another game over case. Rated M for mature. This was 16-year-old Jose Rabadan Pardo. He lived in Spain in the neighborhood of Santiago el Mayor. He lived there with his father, his mother, and his baby sister. Jose was a huge fan of video games. He spent many hours playing them, as many teenagers do. He was also a huge fan of martial arts, and he loved swords, specifically katanas. One of his favorite video games was Final Fantasy VIII, a game I've never played before. And in the game is this character, Squall Leonhardt. Oh god, I can hear the gamer nerds coming at me for saying it wrong, probably. In the early morning hours of April 1st, 2000, the 16-year-old would wake up fairly early. At about 6 o'clock in the morning, he would grab a katana sword that he owned. He walked up next to his sleeping father, and then he stabbed him, killing him. He then moved over to his mother, and before she could react, took the sword and ended her life as well. And then he went to the room of his 9-year-old sister, who had Down syndrome. She had actually woken up from the commotion that was going on. So he took the sword to her as well. He would go on to say that she was killed because God had dealt her an unfair hand. He then took all 3 of their bodies and dragged them to the bathroom, covered their heads up, and then called the police to confess. He then took all the money in the house they had and he fled. He would tell police that he did all this to his parents because he was trying to avenge Squall Leonhardt. I don't know avenging from what? I don't know Mr. Leonhardt's story. 2 days after he fled the apartment, he was captured and arrested. And once again, we have a story where because he was a minor, he did not get charged like an adult. He would be sentenced to just 6 years in prison and 2 years of probation. He is now out there living a normal life. He has a wife, he has kids, he has a job, and apparently is doing really well. So, killed your family, you got 6 years, a slap on the wrist. Say, don't do it again. Now this is Spain, this isn't the United States, but obviously we're very similar here. And most of you know my opinions on this, so we'll just leave it be. I sincerely hope the rest of his life goes well. In 2004, a infamous sports curse was on the verge of being lifted. People celebrating in the streets. But unfortunately, there would also be death. Hello, true crimers. This is the case of Victoria Snellgrove. Viewer discretion is advised. Victoria was born on October 29, 1982 in Boston, Massachusetts. She was studying journalism at Emerson College, and she was described as just a lovely, funny, caring woman. Unfortunately, that would all end on October 21st, 2004. The Boston Red Sox had just done the unthinkable. It was Game 7 of the ALCS, and they were playing their rivals, the Yankees. They were one victory away from going to the World Series. Rolling into the early morning hours of October 21st, 2004, they did it. They won, they beat the Yankees, they were going to the series. And the crowds outside were rejoicing. They were going apeshit. Massive crowds of people were celebrating in the streets. People were throwing bottles, there was fires. Yankees fans are... These crazy things happen when sports teams win things. You destroy your city. So, Boston police were there already, of course, preparing for stuff like this. And all of this is happening outside of the beautiful, legendary Fenway Park. Now, essentially the riot police, they were armed with FN 303s, which are non-lethal weapons. They shoot out these little pellets, and these are not very big. They're like little tiny things in the palm of your hand. Now, they were being used to control the crowd. So again, they're not lethal. If you shoot them in the right spots, they're not going to do much damage. They'll hurt like hell, but typically you don't, die from these, depending on where you shoot it. Victoria was out there celebrating, and people around her were being very unruly. An officer armed with one of these non-lethal weapons aimed his gun at a particular individual who was not Victoria. She was not causing any problems. The officer missed, and his non-lethal round hit her directly in her eye. The bones behind her eyes shattered into 9 pieces, and it left a 3/4 inch hole inside her eye. And the fragments actually damaged her brain. Sadly, 12 hours after she was shot, she was pronounced dead. The officer who fired the shot was suspended without pay for 45 days, and the family would end up suing FN Herstal, the company who makes those guns, and they won. They won $10 million in a wrongful death lawsuit. During their next game, the Red Sox would honor Victoria, who was just trying to celebrate a curse being broken. Look up the curse of the Red Sox if you don't know. Hello, true crimerers. It's time for another episode of Game Over, Man! Cases. Monopoly. We've all played a game or two in our lives, right? We've all had that one asshole friend or family member that buys up all the expensive shit, and you get so mad, you flip the table over and say, fuck it! But have you ever thought about killing someone over a game of Monopoly? Well, someone did. In July of 1991, a man by the name of Mark Siankowski, he wanted to play a good old game of Monopoly with his buddy, Michael Kluksnick. Now, since they were at Mark's house, he thought, you know what, I get to choose the piece I want to be. Them be the rules of Monopoly. And he really wanted to be the goddamn car. But Michael said, nah, I'm the car, I'm always the car. So Mark did what any reasonable person would do at this point. He punched Michael right in the face. Over a piece of Monopoly piece? What am I even saying? And Michael was like, ugh, fuck you, I'm the car, brah. So, Mark went and retrieved, his, bow and fucking arrow. And without hesitation, he shot Michael through the chest with a bow and arrow. They hadn't even started playing Monopoly. He murdered him because Michael would die. He had a puncture through his heart. Mark, a grown adult, murdered his friend because they were arguing about what piece to play with. I don't, words, huh? Shish kebab, applesauce, titty winkles. Who does this? I don't have pictures of either of the men involved. I can't find any. So Mark, who was 25 years old, he pleaded guilty to criminal homicide. And he was sentenced to 9 to 25 years in a Pennsylvania prison. I am so baffled by this. That someone could be that angry over a piece of a board game that you murder an innocent man for it. I mean, I've been angry in my life, but what level of anger is this? Good Lord. A young man arrested for murder would say, life is a video game. Everybody's got to die sometime. Hello, true crimerers. It's time for another Game Over case. Viewer discretion is advised. This is 18-year-old Devin Moore from Fayette, Alabama. Fun fact, he's actually the brother of a former NFL offensive lineman named Mookie Moore, just so you know. His older brother would actually refer to Devin as a troubled child, and that would become very evident on June 7th, 2003. It started simply because he was detained for suspicion of stealing a vehicle. Allegedly, he remained completely cooperative as they were booking him, and then as they were walking down a hallway, Devin would then lunge at Officer Arnold Strickland. He would grab his .40 caliber Glock from his holster, and Devin shot the officer twice, once through the head. Officer James Crump heard the gunshots and he began to run towards where they were happening. Before Crump had any opportunity to fire his weapon, Devin fired 3 shots into him, including 1 through the head. Devin then proceeded down the hallway with 2 dead bodies behind him, where he got to a room where he met Ace Mueller, who was a dispatcher. He then fired 5 shots into Ace, including 1 through the head. Devin then grabbed a set of keys and stole a police cruiser. According to Devin himself, those 3 men were murdered within 1 minute. Luckily, he would be recaptured pretty quickly. When he was arrested, he said, and I quote, "Life is like a video game. Everybody's gotta die sometime." This is when Grand Theft Auto Vice City came into the picture. Devin had managed to purchase the game while he was a minor, because these are rated M for mature. They determined that he logged several hundred hours worth of gameplay in a game that prosecutors would then say is a game that's specific towards murdering cops, stealing cars, and that was the formula for exactly what Devin did. An attorney would say that Grand Theft Auto Vice City literally trained Devin to do what he did. And in the end, there were 2 dead police officers and a dead police dispatcher. Prosecutors would say that Devin had like this video game menu pop up in his brain that gave him a decision to make. So Devin Moore was convicted of all 3 murders, and he was sentenced to death, where he is still awaiting his execution. But Devin Moore, he chose to commit those murders all on his own. He was suffering from PTSD, by the way. A video game did not make him do what he did. He did that. A harmless Madden NFL tournament would turn deadly in Jacksonville, Florida. Hello, true crimerers. It is time for another Game Over case. Viewer discretion is advised. This story takes place at the Jacksonville Landing in Jacksonville, Florida. On August 26, 2018, inside the landing was a video game tournament. It was happening inside the Good Luck Have Fun game bar, which that sounds like a kind of cool place. And inside the game bar was about 150 people or so, between people who are playing the game and people who are just spectating. This was 24-year-old David Katz. I guess he went by the name Bread. Why do they always have that hairstyle? Like always. Anyways, during one of the games, he lost. Oh no, deal with it. Well, he did deal with it. He refused to shake the hand of his competitor. He left the center, and then he came back in with 2 handguns. There's a video that the Jacksonville News released soon after this happened where you can actually hear when the gunshots started because the event was streaming this thing. But at approximately 1:30 p.m., David Katz walked back into the building and began firing. He would fire 12 shots into the crowd of people. And by doing so, he killed 22-year-old Elijah Clayton. He was visiting from Woodland Hills, California. And 27-year-old Taylor Robertson from Ballard, West Virginia, was also shot and killed. David Katz managed to shoot at least 10 more people, but none of them were killed, fortunately. But all of them had to go to the hospital with bullet wounds. The police's response actually was pretty good. They got there within a few minutes of the shooting starting. And instead of owning up to his actions and the horror he committed that day, he put the gun to his own head and ended his own life. David was also not originally from Florida. He was visiting the tournament from Baltimore, Maryland. Apparently, he actually had won a Madden tournament before. He won $10,000. So when he lost a couple of rounds in this particular event, well, it set him off, obviously. It turns out David had a history of mental health issues. He was on several antipsychotics. He had even been involuntarily committed to mental institutions a few times prior. Nobody else was held criminally responsible, of course, because the shooter was the only one who did it. And there were lawsuits filed, but I do not know the outcome of those, unfortunately. The Jacksonville landing has since closed and been demolished. A video game is never worth it. Swatting. It is a stupid, cowardly, and dangerous game to play. I have seen it happen to people here on TikTok when someone's feelings get hurt. Well, here is a story to learn from. To learn that the game of swatting can cost actual lives. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the 2017 Wichita swatting. Viewer discretion is advised. This is 25-year-old Tyler Barris. He lived in Los Angeles, California. He dreamed of one day being a competitive gamer, but that dream never panned out for him. Instead, he became known as a swatter. You see, when his precious little feelings got hurt over losing a couple of games, he learned that he could call the police, posing as some crazy person who just shot up a school, threatened to shoot up a school, threatened to blow up a school, or he'll call sometimes and say, I just shot my mom and now I'm gonna shoot my brother. Which forces the police to come to the place where he says he is, which is never actually his place. It's his targets, the people who he was gaming against that beat him. And you know, it's this little, harmless little prank, haha. But police don't know it's a prank. Police have to respond like it's a real thing. He says he has guns pointed at people, so they're gonna come with guns pointed at who they think is him. Now, eventually he would get arrested for this swatting tactic, and he spent 16 months in jail for it. But when he got out of jail, he had nowhere to go. He became homeless living in Los Angeles. He would start using libraries to use the internet, where he became known as a person you could ask to take care of an issue. Hey, I want someone swatted. Can you do it for me? He says, yeah. This is Casey Viner and Shane Gaskill. You see, they were playing a game, Call of Duty World War II. Casey and Shane were on the same team. They had a bet going for $1.25 as to which team would win. Shane accidentally killed the character that Casey Viner was playing. They lost. They lost a $1.25 bet. Casey got pissed off. He reached out to Tyler Barris on Twitter. Shane, pumping his chest, said, yeah, come and get me. Shane gave Casey his address. It wasn't his address, it turns out. It was his old address. Currently living in the house in Wichita, Kansas, was father of two, Andrew Finch, and his mother. Tyler says he's just shot someone, and he's holding two other people hostage. The cops come, they surround the house. This is the body cam footage. Police approach it from all angles. Andrew comes onto the porch, completely surprised. When it looks like he moves his arm down, he gets shot from the side. And he died. He had nothing to do with anything. His child had to walk over his body. The officer was found not guilty. He's serving 20 years in prison. Stupid game, stupid prize. I don't think that's right. Hello, true crimerers. It's time for another game over case. And this is the case of Rocky Rambo Wei Nam Com. Right. On September 26, 2017, in Vancouver, Canada, Rocky Rambo here, oh my god. Yeah, that is his real name. Well, he was out taking a walk in this little neighborhood here, when he happened to notice a couple bringing in groceries from their car. That couple was 64-year-old Diana Ma Jones and her 68-year-old husband, Richard Jones. By all accounts, Diana was a lovely woman and she was an occupational therapist. Mr. Jones was retired, and he required the use of a walker to move around his house. They were just described as a really loving couple. They just got along with everyone. Well, Rocky VII or whatever here, I guess he just really wanted to ruin that. As Diana brought in the last bag of groceries, Rocky Horror Picture Show Com ran into the house after her. On his person, he had a hatchet, 2 knives, and a ball of twine. He ran in, he charged after Diana, and he just attacked her. Investigators believe he initially attacked her in the living room. She fought him. She scratched him. And as a matter of fact, they found his DNA under her nails. He would bludgeon her over the head. He would then drag her into the kitchen. He then slit her throat. And then Richard, using his walker, walked into the kitchen. When Rambo Whoosy-Whatsits, he stabbed Richard over 100 times. This, by the way, is one of the many pieces of evidence, a bloody shoe print that Rocky Rambo left. Anyway, then using the hatchet, he began to chop at Richard's neck. He would then drag their bodies to their shower and left them there. Authorities believe this kind of attack took a very long time. He then stole some fruit from the kitchen. He then got into their Kia Soul, drove it around the neighborhood, and then abandoned it. He chucked his clothes and some of the weapons in a trash bin. Authorities were able to trace the hatchet, which he actually left at the house, back to its original sale, which led to footage, which led to the capture of Rocky Rambo. His interrogation is, well, it's just crazy. So why did he do it? Well, he would claim that he was in a fog of video gaming. He said he suffered from gaming consciousness, meaning he literally thought he was in a video game. Unfrickin-believable. Then he would say, I don't know why I did it. He didn't even know them. The real motive is not actually known. He's just another monster. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. Hello, true crimerers. It's time for another episode of Game Over. Deaths related to games. And today's story starts with Dungeons & Dragons, aka Nerd. I played it before. It's a role-playing game. It's kind of fun. Good way to interact with your friends. One of the greatest episodes of the show Community, if you've never seen it, dear God, watch it, is an episode centered around Dungeons & Dragons. Pierce, you were an asshole. Anyway, yeah. This was 20-year-old Jennifer Still, and she was from Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Now, she was a fan of playing Dungeons & Dragons, and she would play it with fellow nerd friend John Ischinger. Now, John was really into that game. Believe it or not, there was a time where Satanism, witchcraft was linked to Dungeons & Dragons. And because it's a game where you're interacting directly with your friends, anger, animosity can all come out as well. We're talking worse than Monopoly. A lot of times these characters that you're essentially playing in this game, well, to some people that kind of can feel real. And maybe love is in the air. On July 6, 1999, Jennifer Still's boyfriend Kevin would go into their apartment and he would find her stabbed to death in their bedroom. She had been stabbed repeatedly in the abdomen and her throat was cut. Detectives were able to clearly discern that this was a crime of passion, one of intense rage. It appeared she knew her killer. She let him in. But this case would go unsolved. They did have a single drop of blood from the killer in the bathroom, but they were never able to link it to someone. Fast forward to 2005, also in Pennsylvania. Grandfather George Reeves would enter his home, which is located in King of Prussia. He found his two daughters, Heather and Lisa, and his granddaughter, Avery, all stabbed to death. You see Heather, pictured here, she was friends with Jennifer Still. She played Dungeons & Dragons, along with John Ischinger. The wounds on the women in this case were identical to the wounds given to Jennifer Still. This was the same killer. Investigators found John Ischinger with a bandage wrapped around his hand after these murders. He said he was bit by a dog. Nope. You see, while playing Dungeons & Dragons, he fell in love. First, with Jennifer Still. She rejected him, so he stabbed her to death. 6 years later, he fell in love with Heather Greaves. She rejected him, so he stabbed her to death. He murdered her sister and her daughter simply because they were there. He was convicted and got 3 death sentences. An online game would lead to one of the most horrific murders I think I have ever heard. Hello, true crimerers. This is another Game Over case. Viewer discretion is advised. And it is the case of Gabriel Kuhn. Gabriel was born on March 12, 1995. And he lived in the beautiful Santa Catarina, Brazil. Now, this fella is Daniel Petry. He was a teenager and neighbor to Gabriel, and they were kind of friends. Now, where Gabriel is known as like a sweet kid, just someone who always got along with all the other kids in the neighborhood, Daniel is a little opposite. He was described as a very aggressive young person. He would snap like that. He would just go off on you without any hesitation. It was so bad that his parents sent him to psychiatrists, and that never seemed to do the trick. Now, something that Gabriel and Daniel had in common was their love for online gaming. Specifically, a game called TIBIA. A game, if I'm being honest, that I have never heard of in my life. But it's one of these types, it's one of those like huge MMO RPG games. It has like a massive online community. Now, in the game, they have their own currency called TIBIA coins. Tibia's a bone, right? Oh, that's really foreboding in this. Okay, so Gabriel asked to borrow 20,000 TIBIA coins from Daniel. Daniel said, sure, here you go. Some time goes by. Daniel wants his TIBIA coins back. Gabriel says, no, I can't do that. And then 12-year-old Gabriel banned Daniel from his contacts online. He didn't like that. So he went over to Gabriel's house under the guise of, you know what, let's squash this. I'm sorry, I'm sure you're sorry. Can I come in? We can hang out and talk. And Gabriel let him in. And then Daniel locked the door behind him. He then proceeded to beat Gabriel nearly to death. Daniel then dragged Gabriel to a nearby bed where he sexually assaulted him repeatedly. Oh my God. Daniel then took a power cord of a game console and began to strangle him to death. But he wasn't fully dead. Daniel was going to hide him in a crawl space, but he was too big. So he found a hacksaw and began cutting his limbs off. And that's when he realized that Gabriel was still alive. And he continued to cut. He cut off both legs, both arms, his torso was by itself. He just left his body parts everywhere, just for Gabriel's parents to find. He didn't care. He confessed the day of. He only got 3 years